Hey guys, and welcome back to Mycology. This video will begin what I guess will be the first series on this channel covering stuff that I found and collected before I decided I wanted to start making videos on this stuff. Or more simply, pre-channel species. While I collected some of these mushrooms as much as a year ago, I noted down plenty of information when I collected them, took many pictures, and preserved the mushrooms so I could keep them in my collection. The species I want to talk to you about today is known as Ganoderma Tsugae, or more commonly, the hemlock varnish shelf fungus. This mushroom is one I found and collected in September of 2022 in a sandy forest including various species of conifers and hardwoods. I found it growing from the stump of an old hemlock tree. One thing that can be noted about this mushroom right from the get-go is that this mushroom is a polypore. That means that if you look on the underside here, you'll see a large number of tiny pores from which spores are released, whereas some other types of mushrooms have gills on the underside. This already narrows down the species into the order Polyporales. Another thing I noted upon walking up to this mushroom is that it's a shelf fungus. You can probably imagine this type of fungus based on the name, and it includes things like conchs or other fungi that tend to grow on the sides of trees, creating this shelf-like appearance. Knowing this helps to further narrow down the mushroom we're looking at here. The last major thing I took note of as I was walking up to this guy was the species it was growing on. As mentioned, I believe it was a hemlock stump that had been dead for a number of years. There are other characteristics of note to talk about here, like the distinct coloration or the density of the mushroom, but this is a good start. For now, let's talk a little more about the species Ganoderma Tsugae. Ganoderma Tsugae falls into the division Basidiomycota, which is the most common type of mushroom found on land. It's the type we'll be talking about most often as they produce these large, pretty fruiting bodies and are the most abundant when mushroom hunting. Another division we might dip into is that of Ascomycota, which incorporates living saprophytes, parasites, or symbiotes. This species is found within the class Agaricomycetes, which includes not only the mushroom-forming fungi, but also many non-mushroom fungi such as rusts. As I mentioned, it is within the order Polyporales, it is within the family of Ganodermataceae, the genus Ganoderma, and the species Tsugae, which is named based on the species it is almost always found on, the eastern hemlock, or Tsuga canadensis. This genus includes popular mushrooms like the bear bread, the artist conch, and as we're talking about now, the varnish shelf mushrooms. Since this mushroom is found growing on eastern hemlock, its range parallels that of the host, being northern montane areas east of the Rocky Mountains. Many species within the genus Ganoderma can be easily identified by the shiny, lacquered-looking caps. Some distinctive characteristics of this species in particular include that shiny, lacquered cap surface I just mentioned, an obvious stem, its bright red coloration and brown underside, and a very tough fruiting body. Some further characteristics include that it's parasitic and saprobic on the wood of eastern hemlock and maybe other conifers, meaning it works to decay dead wood in the forest. It causes a white rot in the heartwood, or the innermost section of the tree. It has annual growth, so it will continue to grow year after year, appearing in the spring through fall. It is distributed in the north of the Midwest, northeastern America, and the Appalachian Mountains, following the eastern hemlock, as I mentioned. The shelf is wide, being fan or kidney-shaped. Caps are colored when mature, ranging from dark red to orangish red. The pores are whitish or reddish-brown when old. As with all Ganoderma species, when viewed under a microscope, the spores are double-walled or chambered. The spore print, or the color of the spores that fall from the fruiting body, is brown. The stem is most often present, up to 3 centimeters thick, colored like the cap, and is often distinctively angled away from one side of the cap. The flesh is whitish and soft when young and fresh, but soon becomes tougher. There are 16 Ganoderma species found across North America, which are as follows. Now, most of these can be easily identified based on location and host. For instance, of the 16 here, only 5 species can be found in the northeastern or midwestern United States, which is where I found this guy. So, now that we've narrowed it down quite a bit, let's talk about the 5 species that remain. Ganoderma lobatum has a much duller brown cap, no stem, and has new layers growing under it each year. The lack or presence of a stem can often be misleading, as some species which are not supposed to have a stem sometimes do, and vice versa, but it's still worth considering. Ganoderma curtisii typically grows on hardwoods, and while its subspecies, Ganoderma curtisii meredithiae, does grow on conifers, it is primarily found in southeastern United States. Ganoderma aplanatum lacks the distinctive red coloration on the cap. Ganoderma sessile is typically found on hardwoods and also most commonly is absent of a stalk, hence the name. However, this still might be my species just based on how similar this looks to my picture, and because the stump I found it on was fairly rotted, so I'm not entirely sure it was a hemlock. I suspect this mushroom is Ganoderma Tsugae because I believe it was growing on a hemlock, but the stump it was on was fairly rotted, so I might be wrong. It is also similar in terms of color and the other characteristics I mentioned. If you've listened this far, you know pretty much everything I do about the hemlock varnish shelf fungus. If there's more interesting things you know about this species, let me know in the comments, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks, and I'll see you next time for more mycology.